Sorry, one moment. Some technical difficulties. Matt, you should be the co-host. You should be able to share your screen
It's,
now.
I had to leave and jump back in for permissions issues, but I
Ah,
am here. So yeah, thank you for the introduction. I apologize for having to kind of jump out there for a moment, but we will get started. I'm excited to see the turnout. As I understand, it's quite the turnout. I don't see the numbers right now, but 183 people. That's quite impressive. So I'm very excited, and hopefully everybody gets something out of value out of this. As a note, one of the things that I really want to tackle here is just kind of bringing everyone into the world of, for lack of better terms, innovation, seeing how we can use it on a regular basis, and seeing how you can take advantage of some of the tools and functionality that is out there today. If somebody could verify you can see my screen,
yep, I see it.
okay. And I'll wave a quick hello. You should be able to see me very quickly, but I will turn my camera off just to focus in on content. And then towards the Q&A section, we'll jump back into camera. All right. So a bit of a lengthy name here. Unlock the full potential of GIS leveraging Python, Arcade, and AI. So for from everybody here is probably very, very familiar with what it means to improve your GIS platform for your specific use case and your specific need. As we've accelerated from kind of previous worlds of Visual Basic, more into modern worlds as it relates to using some of these lighter languages that are very, very powerful, like Python and Arcade. And now this full leverage functionality of AI is really starting to empower how we can, as GIS staff, develop quite complex tools and workflows that make our life a little bit easier, but also help us find and empower our day-to-day workflow. All right, so quick agenda. This is going to be demo focused. It's actually going to be quite thin on the world of Arcade because at this point, pretty well everyone has a firm understanding of what Arcade is. We'll do a very quick introduction demo into how you can use Arcade in something like Esri's ArcGIS Online. Then we're going to take a look at automating some GIS workflows with Python, and then going to do a demo. And then again, we're going to leverage AI to build our very own GPT that we could then use and empower on a day-to-day basis with our knowledge base. And this is where it gets really quite interesting and quite a bit more powerful than, say, previous tools that are available to us. Then we'll do a quick Q&A and a wrap up. So about Canopy really quickly. So we're a spatial technology company. We're based out of Ontario, Canada. We have operations in Texas, Wyoming, Florida, and British Columbia. We really focus on one thing. We find problems, we solve those problems, and then we scale it into a solution that goes to market. Some of those tools, as an example, are Plot Pilot Pro, Plot Pilot SME, which is built specifically for the ArcGIS Experience Builder. And in this case, this tool essentially automates your land planning maps so you don't have to make them ever again. You click one button, they're produced. Then in addition to that, we focus in on looking at complex processes and challenges inside of the urban environment, urban planning environment, and the kind of smart city world. And then we use tools like AI and IoT, augmented reality, to really kind of shift and move things forward in a direction that's helpful for everybody. And then in addition to that, as a final note, one of the kind of key pillars that we focus on is accessible data solutions, meaning that we're always looking to democratize geospatial information for all. And that's really what today is. It is to kind of empower everyone as much as is possible with the current tools that are on the landscape today. Myself, I'm a professional planner by background. I worked in government for 17 years as a GIS manager. For the most part, my focus areas are on land development, underground utilities, and cybersecurity. I do, just through coincidence, have a pathway that was involved in IT and surveying. I have a couple applications published. Many at this point, I think this. I do point this out that 1,500 Esri applications at this point in a career is very common. I think most everyone would have these really wild and huge numbers as it relates to how many applications you've built over the years when you've been in the industry for 17 or so years. But I do like to put it in there because it's a fun metric. And then I'm currently pursuing my PhD in public policy. All right, so Arcade. As I said, everyone's pretty well familiar with the use and functionality of Arcade. But really what it is intended to do is act as this thin language that's inside of an environment that can make your life a little bit easier by leveraging some of the capabilities. Now, traditionally, if we were to sit here and become a developer, we would have to have a pretty lengthy amount of history and experience in developing applications, understand what it means to have a base understanding of object-oriented programming, some level of language, whether it be C# or C++, whether you're strong in Visual Basic and so on, and kind of having those fundamentals built out to really understand what it means to go to a library, call that information in, access the resource that's a JavaScript level, and then utilize it moving forward. But a lot of that's been torn down pretty substantially as a result of the interception, or sorry, the kind of use of AI for the modern person. Really what it's become now is being able to question an AI model in a way that's most efficient, or to use it to improve some of the knowledge base that you may have. So some of the common use cases, we're looking at dynamic visualization, so improving your visualization in a way that can leverage more modern approaches, or just simply refining something that you've seen a limitation on. So if it's on out of the box functionality, you can further refine it and extend it with the capability of something like Arcade, in this case, in ArcGIS Online. I see the chat. I'm not sure if there's.
It looks like there's a couple of issues with some people, but I mean, I hear you pretty clear.
Okay. And I should have pretty good internet. It should be in the gigabyte speeds, but if it changes, let me know.
Okay.
All right. Smart calculations directly to your maps. So you really don't need some level of programming experience. Again, this is the key function. Though, when we do look at the image here at the bottom of the screen, it's not overwhelmingly inviting. But the point of it is that we now have tools that can make this more inviting. It can make us more efficient. It can make us more streamlined in our functionality. But the question is, how do we put all these tools and all these pieces together? So what we can do when we start to think about this is we can look at, as an example, some data inside of, in this case, ArcGIS Online. We have a example piece of data here that is in New Zealand. It's just some points on a map, and there's some attributes that are attached to it and some attachments that are attached to it. But what maybe we want to do is we may want to develop an expression that allows us to refine this in a way that will kind of extract key pieces that we're interested in. So in this case, where did it go? Of course, on a live demo, we lose the actual code. Our code seems to disappear. Just a second here. I'll go capture it from a different repo. So I am going to share the repository of all the code snippets we're going to be using today.
When you get a chance, can you maximize the screen? We had a request to zoom in a little bit on the screen there.
Yeah, certainly.
Thank you.
All right. So maybe what we'll do is we'll kind of keep jumping through where we were heading. And in the meantime, I'm going to post this repo for everyone to access while we're sitting here. Right. There we go. Couple clicks and we're back up and running. Should be able to see my screen again.
Yes.
I think we can zoom in a little bit, but this is likely as good as it's going to get. Keeping in mind, all of this repository will be available after the fact. But in this case, we have an example here where we're essentially just looking through the data and we're going through to make some determinations about it. So in this case, we have our data here. It's just a series of points. We can take a look at it, get familiar with it. We've got this thing called VP type. We've got this thing called VP number. We may want to symbolize against that VP type or that VP number. We may want to understand a little bit more about it, right? This is kind of the base understanding of Arcade as a whole. As it stands right now, you're given some key functionalities with smart mapping. But if you want to advance it in a way that kind of creates a benefit to you, you can go through and you can do that by adding some code snippets that will draw you in that direction. So in this case, essentially what's playing out here is we're telling the map to go through and capture some specific information about what we're looking at, and then put that into essentially a pop-up that you could then utilize later on. Then in addition to that, to force a color change that would allow you to shift that so that you'd be able to see a different color for this specific viewpoint. I will kind of keep an eye on the chat as I see it, but if there's anything, okay. Yeah, so essentially what we're looking at here is a very, very basic example of arcade, but again, it's not overwhelmingly inviting. It can seem a little intimidating. There's a lot going on here, and without that kind of key knowledge base of understanding programming, it really is going to seem overwhelming to the threshold where it's a bit much to start with. I mean, realistically, you're going to have to go to an Esri developer library, understand kind of what's playing out, and you can play inside of the Esri arcade playground or whatever the case may be to kind of build that knowledge base. But again, the arc of this conversation is not so much about building that knowledge base out at the individual level, because that could take many months. What it is that we're wanting to empower ourselves to use the best tools available to solve these similar problems. So continuing on, we're going to jump back to our presentation here. And again, this is just a very simple example with the kind of penultimate design being towards the AI here. But we can jump through and start to think about what we could do with Python. Again, similar problem scenarios, and similar challenges, but we're wanting to accelerate our skills and our problem solving to best understand where we can land with the future potential for, say, Python and arcade. And we want to do that in the most efficient way. And the reality is we don't want to sit here and read hours and hours and hours and hours of documentation to kind of get us there. So one thing that we'll want to kind of consider when we do this is we'll want to consider what can we do with the knowledge base that we currently have to best empower our future selves with all of the tools that are available. We'll talk a little bit about what AI is and the history of it and kind of where it's going. But really, if you could kind of keep that in back of mind, is where are some problems in the past where you've encountered them and you've just kind of been smashing your head, hoping for the best, but nothing's really played out. And when we think about Python, Python again is an extension of capability, right? So these capabilities are inherently within, say, an ArcGIS Pro program, but they're maybe not easily accessible from a toolbox. You may not want them in a specific way or the specific pattern that you're looking at, and you may want to focus in on a specific workflow. So in this case, we're going to look at an example of Python that I've kind of built out here for the conversation, and we're going to export a GDB format into ArcGIS Pro. So I've got this sample data here, similar to what we were looking at. And in this case, I've opened up the Python window, and we're going to run our code, which is essentially going to go through, look at the data that's in the map, it's going to make an assessment, and then it's going to export it, right? Again, the focus being, we could certainly do this, right? There's not really an issue or a habit that would prevent us from going down this pathway. But really what we're provided now is a means it's specific to a workflow that we may desire. And in this case, what it's doing is it's looking at the map document and it's saying assess all of the information within it and export it to a geodatabase of our selecting, right? So in this case, it's on my C drive. So C documents home, blah, blah, blah. So as it's completing this process, it's walking through, determining each of these layers, if they can be exported or not exported, and then it's going to place them into a geodatabase. In this case, it's our database that we're working with, which is called the export GDB example geodatabase. And as it kind of completes this process, we're essentially watching it. It takes a little bit of time, but if we were to consider the workflow on our own, we would be right-clicking, exporting, going through, determining some naming conventions and so on. So not overwhelmingly tedious, but where it becomes tedious is if you've designed this in a specific way in the map to have very specific key components that you're interested in, and you want just that data that's in this map to be exported, the most efficient way would be to implement Python. But again, it could be less efficient if we're sitting here having to code out the solution. So we want to see what can we do to improve this to make our life a little bit easier. And as it sits right now, the best solution is to be able to critically identify the problem and drive towards a solution using these tools that are available to us today. So in this case, what's happened is the information for viewpoint locations, the name, blah, 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 has exported into a geodatabase of our design and named it the exact same name. There are parameters we could adjust if we wanted to, and so on. Then it's also rejected the world topographic map and the world hillshade map because those are not exportable options. If we go look at the geodatabase, we can see here that we have our data. It has an attach relation table as well. But if we were to actually go and look inside of this database, and we were to say identify any given piece of information, we could get familiar with what it means to look at this data, and we could utilize it moving forward. In addition to that, we could seek out the attachments. We could leverage these attachments if we want, and so on. So it becomes very practical in our way to do work with a particular problem. Now, if we wanted to expand this thinking and we wanted to specifically tell it, so sometimes we can run into issues with attachment functionality. If we wanted to specifically tell it, we could go further, and we could run this next code here that's available, which is going to seek out the attachments and enforce them into the geodatabase. So it's something to consider as well. But one of the things we haven't considered is, what if we wanted a layer turned on or off, right? So this is where we're going to take this example and build it into some AI solution in a moment to start to consider using the same block of code. How could we enhance it in a way that provides a solution that allows us to say we only want the selected layers to be exported into a geodatabase? So I'll continue on. Here. Okay, so automating GIS. So that's our second demo. Now let's move on to some of the kind of true power inside of the more modern GPTs and AIs. So I'm going to pause here. I do see a really good question, and Python and Arcade and some commentary back. So I'm gonna jump into that momentarily, because if we're moving a bit too quick through those categorizations, it may be a bit of a challenge to kind of walk through the next functionality, which is to understand and focus in on the problem or the critical challenge. And so I see a lot of the really, really good conversation on where to start with Arcade, where to start with Python. And so the question that kind of stemmed in the chat here is, how do we kind of get started with Arcade? If Arcade is level 1 and Python is level 2, and then implementing your own AI is level 3, how do we possibly start with level 1? And how do we kind of get that base understanding? And the conversations are exactly in the right direction, insofar to say there's lots of repositories available on YouTube. There's lots of repositories available on they're like third-party teaching programs. There's school that offers up solutions to looking at custom coding and so on. But I would actually challenge you to maybe potentially investigate what it means to make your own solution using AI. And that's what we're going to look at today. So really, what we need to consider when we're looking at this great big machine of complexity is some level of core understanding of extensibility. So I'm going to just stay here for a second on this chat window, but what we're talking about is a little bit different than the conversation here. But what we want to know about is extensibility. And in all of these instances, the business use case is going to be that we're wanting to find a problem where we're not able to immediately locate a solution. So in this case, right? So maybe this is a poor example, but we will get into another example. But in this case, we could look at the map and we could see the default symbology. Maybe we wanted to change it to a heat map, and there we go. Maybe we wanted to change it. We'll turn this one on and we'll turn this one off. So perhaps we want to change this to a heat map and we want to turn our labels off or something like that. And maybe this isn't the desired outcome that we're seeking, right? So this is kind of the warrant for elevating the solutions. And when we're looking at this, we could say, hey, there's a couple solutions you can implement as a GIS person. One is go to a user forum, read up on that user forum to see if anybody has a similar problem. And trust me, this is like the way that I did things for years and years and years. Go to that user forum, identify people who have similar problems, work with those people. There's always going to be leaders in that pack, and those people will help you work through those problems. And really, you're kind of just playing a matching game. You're looking for someone who has a similar problem. You're seeing how close it is to your problem, and you're just kind of reverse engineering backwards from that problem. And this is essentially really a trial and error solution. And this is without training. A trial and error solution is actually very effective. It just takes a lot of time. Then there is, and there are many other ways to look at this in a strategic way. So as your knowledge base increases, you can, as an example, go to Esri developers, and you could get a little bit more familiar with playing around in these playground spaces. So this is specific to this particular example because we're talking Arcade, we're talking ArcGIS Online. Obviously, all of these things would change and all of these things would shift dependent upon your experience with development. But in this case, if, as an example, we want to go to JavaScript as our SDK, and I realize these terms may seem a little foreign, but they are really the area of focus of what we're looking at right now. And if we wanted to say, find a similar example, I don't know, maybe we want to edit features with the editor widget, right? We can go in here, we can open the sandbox, and we can begin to take a look at this and say, hey, how does this work? What exactly is going on? Okay, we can add a point, we can add a description, and we create that point, and so on. But when we actually look at the code here on the left, we can identify that this is an item ID for a web map. So if we engage in it, what's going to happen is it's going to open up of course it's not going to. It will open up the map, which is here. So if you wanted to, what you would do is you would just simply change this to your ID, right? So in this case, we'll go through, we'll capture our web map ID up here. It's not going to work because I haven't made mine public, but essentially what we're going to do is go through here and we're going to click refresh. And now it's going to ask us to log in. And so on, right? So now we have our map that we're looking at, and we're able to make some decisions on how to move it forward. But that is, to answer it in a very long way, kind of the best and easiest way to start is to do some trial and error just to begin, but really be able to identify the problem scenario and say, this is a challenge. I'm not able to get where I want to. How do I find the solution? That's kind of the traditional way. More modernly, we really can implement the power of kind of common knowledge, and this used to be crowdsourcing as the term, but now it's considered to be just kind of GPT. Really, it's the same thing realistically. Make sure. Okay. Okay, understood. Anyways, so continue on. I realize we're kind of heading down a bit of a different pathway, but I did want to highlight that because it's going to be critical for this next piece. So if we take all of that knowledge and we consider all of the possibilities of everyone kind of encountering these problems in days past, what we're given is a common knowledge GPT. And these GPTs are quite powerful as a whole. Everyone kind of has one. There's a version of it that does this, or there's a version that will focus in on that, or whatever the case may be. And everybody's trained their knowledge base in their own way, right? So Meta has their own AI. It's called Meta AI. And as you would expect, Meta AI is trained off of a knowledge base of social interactions, right? So all of Facebook and Meta's owned companies feeding into this platform, providing valuable information to their AI. It can make really good assessments of, say, how the common person would look at a problem. And then, OpenAI. Yeah, so the way that they captured all of their data back in the day would have been web scraping, essentially. And that web scraping led to a knowledge base that was developed over time that is then utilized inside of a common chat GPT that we're familiar with today. We're going to walk through that in a moment, but before we get there, you'll recall that one of the things I mentioned is that we should think about the problems that we have so we can best understand them. The reason that we want to consider our problems is our problems specifically can lead to us developing our own knowledge base in a way that is highly efficient. So what I mean by that is I'm Matt. I run into a lot of problems specific to urban planning and specific to urban planning related to GIS. And as a result, I have this kind of robust knowledge base that's in through presentations or Word documents that I've written reports on, and so on and so on and so on. And kind of the world of Matt as a response to these technical problems is a robust knowledge base that is available for me to leverage. However, I'm probably not very good at memorizing it. I'm probably not very good at being able to recall exactly where I want it to be, or so on, or so on, and so on. But what we can do is we can thin that knowledge base out to train our own model to effectively act as us in a way that is most efficient. So what we can start to consider is, what if we had a series of questions and answers to best think through all of the potential problems that we've run into in years past. So this could be an IT ticket system. This could be you writing IT glue. This could be just reports you've written in days past, and so on and so on and so on. All of that knowledge base can be utilized in your own GPT to start to respond to questions specific to you. and specific to your particular workflows and your particular problem. So I've just taken this is actually it's created by AI. I didn't want to sit here and write 35 questions to feed it, but regardless, the point of it remains the same. So you could have this deep, robust knowledge base. And what we want to do is we want to copy this knowledge base and we want to put it into a GPT that we custom create. So you can see I've got other ones here that I've built over days past, but we're going to go through and we're going to begin to build our own GPT that focuses in on that knowledge base that we kind of curated over there. So if you're not familiar with ChatGPT, I'm sure everyone's pretty well had some level of exposure to it, whether they've heard it in the news or whatever the case may be. But you could go to OpenAI. OpenAI is the company that owns ChatGPT. ChatGPT is a functionality. There's another one called DALL-E that's a functionality. And each of these functionalities have their own kind of repository and leverage that creates some level of benefit. The idea behind both of them is that it helps you solve a particular problem with a particular knowledge base. But when we want to be hyper scoped on our knowledge base, we can go through that process and develop a more specific knowledge base to us. So in this case, it's going to show us it's going to have a basic question: what do you want to do? So I would like to make a GIS knowledge base that can be questioned for the average GIS user to gain knowledge on theory as well as on how to. The focus should highlight options in custom coding like that of arcade, Python, etc. So I will give you a knowledge base to draw upon. So we've pasted our knowledge base in there now. And essentially what we're doing is we're forcing so that's a really good question. I'll get to that question in a second, Naomi. So now what we've done is we've fed this information into our own GPT that is kind of curated in the direction to us. But there is a question here, and it's a very good question. Sharing the prompts you're using, do you have any prompt engineering tips? Yeah, okay. So one of the questions to this particular conversation is, if we provide this information to ChatGPT or OpenAI, do they then own it? There's two ways to answer that question. So there is an individual account, and that individual account will provide training data for the larger, broader ChatGPT. And then there's something called a team account, and that team account is fully restricted and reduced down. So anything you put into a team account is completely yours and yours alone. No one else can access that information. It's contained inside of your own space and your own environment. And it's only called upon to in addition to the already existent GPT knowledge base. So when we think of the way that this works is, if you do need a tremendous amount of privacy, then you would lean in favor of a team environment. If you do need a tremendous amount of knowledge base, then either one would work very well, right? There is a cost, as you would expect. And then when you come into, say, ChatGPT as an example, Meta AI. I've kind of had to dance with all of these ones at this point, Microsoft Copilot and so on and so on and so on. They all have their strengths. It really comes down to, what do you need to leverage out of it? At this point in the mixture of everything, ChatGPT is very good with coding environments and very efficient at coding as a whole. So you can start to leverage the capabilities and the functionalities of the tools. Okay, and then there's another question here. Sharing the prompts you're using, do you have any prompt engineering tips you could share? Yeah. Are you using the public ChatGPT or internal AI? So, all right, so the two questions there that I want to kind of respond to. So when it comes to prompt engineering, as a cluster of GIS users, we're already at a huge advantage because we're used to dealing with queries to a computer on a regular basis. There are, and I have seen a number of examples where it just cannot, for the life of it, get to a position where it understands what I'm asking of it. And in those cases, I generally start and refine the question. But to answer, I haven't seen any like mathematical formula. I see a lot of people kind of talk about, yeah, okay. I see a lot of people kind of talk about the notion of, think like this person and respond in this way. We're not necessarily too compelled to lean in that direction. We're really more compelled about productivity and functionality from a GIS perspective, right? We want an end result to be provided, which is really quite technical. So we don't really have to lean into the direction where I see the traditional engineering prompts of like, I want you to blah, 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 blah. What you'll see here when I've written out my particular statement, and I'm making this up as I go for the statement here, but I just kind of know where I needed to land. And in this case, it is very specifically, I'm going to tell it what I need as a key measurable. So, I would like to make a GIS knowledge base that could be questioned for the average GIS user to gain knowledge on theory as well as on how to. So I'm just being very specific in what I need it to do. Then I can go on to say, I want to focus and highlight options for custom coding environments and so on and blah, 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 blah. So this may not be good enough, right? So what it's going to say is, yes, name works. It's going to ask us what we want to call it and so on. And what we can start to do is we can do our own trial and error testing. I would like to know how to develop arcade code that says hello when I click a pop-up followed by some basic detail. Right. So this is very vague. It doesn't tell us anything. I oddly enough, I actually have a photo of the very first question I asked the GPT. I took a photo of it this morning. Anyway, I can't seem to find it in my recent photos, but it literally said write code. The very first thing I ever asked an AI was it for it to write code. So you can see here that it's kind of leaning in favor of what we're wanting it to do, right? So it's going to say some basics about it, and was or is there theory to this, right? So you can kind of see that it missed out on the piece of theory. It didn't really provide us some background. How would I know to use arcade? Give me step by step or whatever, and so on. So we could continue on. I'm going to stop this one, but we could continue on. It's pretty good with its response. But we could continue on looking at the area of interest, right? So it's asking us on the left when we're doing our kind of A/B testing. It's saying, well, what do you want to focus on? Because on the right, it didn't actually give us the result that we wanted. So we're going to refine it, and we're going to say, firstly, you should provide clarification on the course. What's going on theory? Then you should ask the user if they have an understanding. Then you should provide specific detail in how. Whoop, so on. Right. So now we're going to take that same question that we asked a moment ago, and we're going to see if we can shift our overall response. So it's going to go. It's actually going to reload, but something funny. What's going on there? We'll go back to our functionality. All right. So we'll ask it the same question and so on. Okay, so can please share the chat GPT? Yeah. So I'll make this public. Right now it's not set to public. Firstly, I'll create it. Secondly, I'll create the link and we'll update that. And I'll paste that link in there. I think you need to have an account to begin to engage with it. Oh, that's not what I wanted to do. I've lost my question, but regardless, please make a pop-up that says hello and provides critical information from a field on Arc Online or something like that. So now the expectation is that, yeah, so now we're going to get more what we're expecting, right? So we've kind of refined it ever so slightly in a way that's a little bit more efficient, and it's given us a direction that we want to land in further and further. So this is the kind of user side of it. And in this case, it, blah, blah, blah. It says hello, and then it populates a field name or whatever the case may be. Really doesn't matter for this particular example. But what we can continue to do is we can actually feed it more and more information, right? So we could increase the knowledge base with imagery. We could increase the knowledge base with hyper-specific questions to begin with. What would you like to code or whatever? You know what I mean? And you can kind of manipulate this entire environment in a way that's beneficial to you, so you can leverage the tools and functionality. And again, keeping in mind that the way that this particular workflow works is that it gives you the power of a chat GPT, and it adds on top of it based on the knowledge base that you've refined it to focus in on. So the value then kicks in where your knowledge base is specifically improved upon over time. So if you have a whole bunch of code repos and you want to leverage those and add those in here, you could do that. You could train it with it. So if we were to say, go over here, look at our code example here, and kind of continue on, this is a good example of how you should focus on GIS coding, or whatever the case. All right. So now, I don't want to do what I did a second ago. I'm going to wait for it to refresh itself. If there's any questions, I'll check to see if there's anything I didn't see as we were talking here. Okay, great. All right. So from here, what we'd like to do is we would like to improve this code. So very, very basically, we're going to just say, in the simplest of forms, we want to improve our existing code snippet that we've used over here, but we only want to export layers that are turned on in the map. So the expectation is it will begin to go through, evaluate the improved code that we have, and make some assessment around it. This is where it becomes critically important that you don't necessarily need to have this really robust historic knowledge base. You just simply need to know how to identify a problem and know how to extend it into an environment that you're comfortable in. Each of these environments, whether it's Arcade or Python or something like this, a GPT, each of these environments are intended to focus in on expansion and extension, and they're all fully built to allow you to begin to do that. So when you begin to couple these things together, you get a very powerful space where we now have some level of improvement, right? So now we, in a matter of seconds, or give or take, we've now improved our code very simply by saying we only want to export this particular snippet of languaging. So I'll add this in here for anybody. I just know that this is a practical piece of code, so I'm going to share it with everybody. um, Export PDP from map with attachments with field POC selected. There we go. Okay. So that snippet of code is available for you to do whatever you want with. Yeah, so I mean, this is really the main kind of area that I want to focus in on and showcase to everybody, is that this isn't some far off in the distance capability. It's actually very simple to go through for the average user to develop and to improve upon it. And this is just like a previous example before we met. But from here, I'd like to see if there's any questions or I'm very happy with the way that the presentation graphics turned out. So hopefully everyone enjoyed them as well.
Yeah, I think that was really awesome. Very cool stuff. There was one more question that did come in at the
Okay.
end there. Can you provide the GPT builder a link to your repo so that it always sees the most updated version of your code?
Um, yeah, I mean, yeah, you certainly can in terms of extensibility to draw upon a resource to see what you're driving at, which is, hey, I've got this repository of information, whether it's here, whether it's a text file, or whatever the case may be. Um, I I don't know that the way that they've configured this right now can do that. Um, but I would imagine the functionality of the API, which is not so easily accessible here. Let's go. Um, I'll show you. What do we want? We want the API. So you do have functionality inside of the API environment, which gives you that extensibility. I would imagine if I were to think this through really quickly, you would want it so that you would use like an Integromat or a make.com or something, which would constantly pass the information and then bring it in this environment here as some level of authentication. This would be like OAuth level. Like it's a little bit more technically complex, but it's certainly feasible. And I can certainly see the value. I guess it depends on your overall workflow as to if you would see the value, right? Like, do you want to write the code and then just have it call into to train on a regular basis and what that iteration would be, and so on and so on and so on. So yeah, certainly. I mean, the way I like to look at everything is anything is possible. It's just a matter of making a determination on what you would see focus on. Okay, so I see another. I hope that answers your question. It's a yes, but it's like a complex yes. Do we think do you think we can use this to implement GIS standards? Yeah, I mean, the there's kind of this question, right? Of like, to what extent do you accept the knowledge base? And with something like coding, it's not really that harmful because it is just simply, I'm going to go run some coding, I'm going to make an assessment, and then I'm going to implement the coding. The question is actually a reverse question for something like code, and there's lots of use cases where people have released the wrong pieces of their code, and their entire code library is released to the world, and it gets put into the overall GPT. So the team environment is the response in the other direction. Now, as it relates to as a consumer, you certainly have to evaluate. You know, if we were to ask a question if we were to ask a question of what it would mean to evaluate, say, a GIS standard, we probably want to be quite a bit more critical on the assessment. And we want to ensure that we're evaluating the assessment in a way that is really going to be helpful for the intended use. So, what I mean by that, and I realize that that's kind of ambiguous and vague, but what I mean by it is that ChatGPT can give you lots of robust answers, but those robust answers may not align with what you need as an end result. So I hope that that answers it. And I do see a really important question that I intended to get to, but we never got to. So I'm going to actually highlight this as well. So yeah, so there's really good questions here. I like it. So the question from related to Dolly and GPT, I'm going to jump to that in 1 second. So I heard that Esri has their own AI functionality. Do you know anything about it, if it can be used for our own environments? Yeah, so Esri, if you take a look here in the technical support area, if you log in, I believe it prompts you to log in at the very start, but you can click in the bottom right. I've already logged in, and you could ask it a question. So I would like to make a map and buffer a point. Like this is the classic, how would I do this, or whatever case may be. Right. So what it's going to do is it's going to make an assessment on what you should do and how you should do it. It's very efficient at specific GIS workflows. I haven't really explored this at a personal level into really complex workflows, workflows that are going to involve a lot of historically complex steps. So say making your own network or making your own geocoder or doing your own address standardization. These are very complex tasks historically. So I don't know how well it performs, but at the buffer level, we're running basic geoprocessing tasks. It appears to be very efficient at its communication. I asked it something the other day, just in general, running through it, and it was very good at what it needed to do. In this case, it really is drawing upon its own repo, right? It's looking at like, what do we know as a company from Esri? And the presumption, I am making pure assumptions at this point, but the presumption is that they would self-train using their data that they have in-house, but I really don't know. That's hard to tell. All right, the question to Dolly and ChatGPT. I haven't had a lot of exposure to Dolly, so I don't think I would be any real value to answer that question. Generally speaking, ChatGPT is efficient in a lot of ways. I've heard of a few people using Dolly, but some of the AI models are hard to access and hard to reach. So sometimes that could get in the way as well. Okay. All right, so I see two new questions here. So one of the questions, do you have any recommendations on how we can identify and avoid hallucinations? So I haven't actually seen a hallucination in any of my practical experience, and I've been using this since 2022. I've heard of them. I think it's really hard to comment because I don't know of any real world examples that I've encountered in any of the workflows that I've done. Now, what I can say is I do see on a regular recurring basis if you provide information to say as an example, ChatGPT, it can end up on the wrong pathway and it won't break that cycle until you cut loose on it. So I wouldn't necessarily call that a hallucination, but I do see it as a problem because it will refer back to the wrong information and will continue to refer back to the wrong information. So in this case, it's efficient, right? But there are examples where when we start to think about things that are a little bit more humanized, a little like humanity-based thinking, rather than this very focused effort, you can certainly encounter problems of it not understanding how to cut loose or be corrected. So what I mean by that is, say as an example, this was not the result I wanted, right? So we kind of force it to go down a different pathway. So I want it to be better, something like this, right? It's completely ambiguous. It means nothing to the computer. It means nothing to us. But the computer is now lost between two potentials where it doesn't really know what you're thinking. So now it's actually sending us into Python for some unknown reason when we know that we want to be an arcade, right? Or whatever the case may be. In this case, it may be a poor example because we did give it a Python a second ago. Yeah, no problem. One of the things to consider is once it goes down this pathway, this is nowhere near what I wanted. You need to correct all of it. Something like this, right? And we kind of keep forcing it to think and rethink of the problem. So, which is the correct solution? The minute that we now send it down this pathway, it's going to not know, and we're not going to know as end users. So it is this potential challenge of once it's been trained in its conversation, it will not allow you to break loose on what it's previously mentioned because it's going to get confused over and over and over. So again, it is a computer, right? So we as GIS people have a huge advantage in that we're working with computers. So we kind of already know how to talk to them. We really have a firm understanding of what it means to query a computer and not confuse it. I would say if you land in a series of answers that aren't really feeling in the right direction, I would say cut loose and start a new chat that gives you the opportunity to explore the same topic and conversation in a new way. Now, I would imagine if that happened at scale, so if all of a sudden everybody believed that everything they've ever been given was incorrect from ChatGPT, it would cause this gigantic problem in and amongst the algorithm in the background. But for right now, it's minuscule, so I can't imagine that that would be a realistic problem. Okay, so how reliable are these tools how reliable are these AI tools for beginners, specifically working on ArcGIS projects attempting to determine locations for development? I'm not sure I fully understand. So do you mean like a coding environment, or do you mean like a urban development? Maybe Ryan, if you could clarify while I jump to the next one. Um, okay, yeah, yeah. All right, so let me just working on ArcGIS project attempting to determine location. Oh, okay, so like I see what you mean. So suitability analysis or something like that, right? So how could we look at and evaluate potential locations? So when we get into something which is really urban development is kind of multi-criteria decision analysis and support ecosystems. So it's this really complex tool system, meaning that one answer is never the correct answer, and all the answers generally diluted down won't really ever become the correct answer either. So this is the challenge of urban planning as a whole, realistically. So when you want to use and implement tool sets, it is key to understand the guardrail extent of these tool sets. So in this case, we never really want to truly throw everything at the computer and expect it to solve all of our problems. We really want to assess and evaluate um, how we can use the tools in a way that's most efficient to drive towards the most realistic solution in the most kind of critically thought out way. And I say this with a tremendous amount of cautionary around it, because if we accept everything that's provided to us as an answer inside of here, we're ultimately going to end up in a really weird, kind of funny spot. But generally speaking, the answer to the information are very good. Obviously, at that humanities level thinking, they become a little bit grayer, and they continue on in that direction as you get more ambiguous and more vague and more kind of 30,000 foot thinking. So to answer the question specifically, um, you can certainly evaluate what criteria you would want to use. So like as an example, I want to use GIS to determine site suitability in GIS. What would be some criteria I should consider, right? So in this case, really what we're wanting to do is maybe extend our own knowledge, right? So we're really good as planners by going through and saying, hey, I know that this site at a local level is critically of value because it's connected to services, or it's in a good location as a result of zoning or future land use, or so on or so on and so on. So one of the things we could do is we could evaluate, in this case, other criteria that we didn't maybe think about before. So perhaps in this case, so it's adding in solar farms if there's solar farm nearby, the wind farm. This isn't the direction I expected it to go in, but regardless, what we're wanting it to do is expand our own capabilities as a result of understanding in the space. So, I'm not going to sit around and think about wind farms, but it is a good thing to know when we are doing an assessment, especially when it relates to site suitability. Maybe at a personal level, you may be interested in understanding where wind farms are or solar farms are for a number of reasons, or whatever the case may be. But at a professional level, at a local government level, these probably wouldn't get too far into the mix of planning for urban development as a whole. I hope that answers your question, Ryan.
Real
Okay,
quick,
so yeah,
sorry, it is 1 o'clock. So if you don't have time to stay, that's fine. You can totally leave.
I've got time. I'm
We
good.
did. We have a couple more questions we can get through real quick. But for those of you that are going
Mhm.
to go, please, head out. Thank you for joining us. This presentation will be posted on our Eurista Texas YouTube channel within the next week or so. So keep an eye on that. Yeah, let's continue asking some questions or answering some questions here.
Certainly. So can you suggest a roadmap for beginners to grow into building own models? I think the biggest thing, I don't know that it needs to be any real formal roadmap, but the biggest and best thing to do with any AI is to see if it can enhance a problem that you're working through. So whether it is Meta AI or this Dolly, or whether it's ChatGPT, or whether it's Microsoft's solution of Copilot, or whatever the case may be. Apple AI is coming out or is out. I think it's December, it's supposed to be out. It really is a matter of just looking at a problem and saying, hey, could AI help me with this? And then there are going to be some that are incredibly easy to access, right? Microsoft Copilot, though it does have a cost, it's going to be easy to access. Google's Gemini, though it does have a cost, is going to be easy to access, meaning it's a quick flick of a switch and it's robust and it's accessible. But there are more complex ones, right? ChatGPT, building your own GPT model is quite a bit more complex from a technical level to access, but you can see it does allow you to integrate in plain language. Then you could go even further. You could do, like, from a research level, you could look at Lambda. Lambda is completely open. That's available from Meta, and you could dig even further. So there are kind of levels to how you engage in it, but really the core of it, at least in my own experience, has been that you want to see a problem, you want to see what you have your solution. Is there a better, different, more robust approach that maybe you're not thinking about, right? So as an example, I own Canopy Mapping Company. I am not a marketer, right? There's no way in the world I could sit around and market for the life of me. But I may want to consider using Google Ads, right? So this is a real world example. I don't know marketing very well at all, but I do know the basics of Google Ads and the technology in behind Google Ads. And I used on the weekend, this past weekend, GPT and Meta to help me understand and build a robust solution for Google Ads to run and get all of the data that I needed. So I wonder if I can pull this up. So I've got this ad here and it's scoring in at 92.4%, right? And on my own, I would have never gotten there. This is just flat out, it's not possible. So what I've been able to do is improve a solution based on a particular problem. So I would say just jump in and see how any of these solutions can help you improve your work or help you become more efficient or whatever the case may be. All right. The next question, are you on LinkedIn? I'm actually not on LinkedIn. I've never seen the value for it. I don't really get what it's about. And I know that I'm very far behind on this because everyone has it. But at a personal level, I just don't understand what it's for. I do know that we're in the process of building a company, LinkedIn. So that I think that part of that is going to force my hand into LinkedIn. So you'll see me there at some point. I don't know how active I'll ever be on it. I don't really understand the purpose at this point. Um, the link to the recording, I believe, is going to be shared. Do you think ChatGPT will ever diminish the need for sites like ArcGIS? No, I don't. I don't suspect so. So there's a notion that something like an AI model is all encompassing and all seeing and kind of Oracle level omnipotent. But the reality is, and you can see it just in day-to-day operations. And, you know, I've been working with this stuff for 2 years, and it's it's gotten really good in some spaces. It's become completely useless in other spaces. So it all comes down to the functionality and the demand of the end user. Everybody has a hypothesis on what's going to play out with AI. I don't really anticipate it overriding and replacing these deeply rooted technologies like Esri's ArcGIS or these deeply rooted technologies that are already out there. I just don't know how they could do it. But you know, I could be naive in my hypothesis. Everyone kind of has their own version of what AI looks like to them. I don't see it. I don't see the kind of omnipotence kicking in. All right. Despite the rushing, excellent presentation and tips. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Was
Okay. I don't.
There was one more
Mhm.
question I think we skipped a little bit early up. Can we integrate ChatGPT into ArcGIS Online dashboards? Is that possible?
Oh, I didn't see that. Okay. Um, yeah, I mean, you could call your own chat window into ArcGIS dashboards, absolutely. Now, in terms of it responding and integrating with that environment, you'd really have to get quite deep into the OAuth space. And again, you would have to have some type of like Power Automate in the background or integration in the background that would allow it to understand what it's looking at and understand the data that it's being fed. So possible, certainly. It would take quite a bit of heavy lifting from a technical aspect to complete that process, largely because it would have to be pulling data in the background. I think it would matter. I think it would, sorry, depend on um, what the intended use case would focus around. So if you want like users, I'm just making an assumption, but if you want users to be able to kind of ask questions about the dashboard that it's looking at, that could be one use case. If the intention is to improve the dashboard as a user, like a GIS staff, that's a bit of a different use case. And then I think the third would be like a person being able to interact and have the dashboard change. I don't think that's possible. I can't see how that would be possible because you would be applying a bunch of filters and stuff. I mean, you could force it in the background through like some notebook stuff, but anyways, I don't see it as realistic at this point. Okay. I don't really see anything else. I appreciate all the like uh great commentary and I'm happy that everyone's excited about this. Um Feel free to like I've got my email. I'll add it in the chat. I mean, obviously some people have left, but
Yeah, like I said, we'll have this recording posted up within the next week or so.
Perfect. Yeah, and feel free to send questions. Like I said, the mantra of canopy mapping is to hear problems, and once we hear enough of those similar problems, we actually go to start to building a solution for them. So the more that people are encountering issues, the more that we like to hear it, and it's always good to talk.
All right, excellent. I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording now.